UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Infinite diversity.
Live long and prosper, and welcome to Infinite Diversity, a Star Trek Universe podcast, here on the United Federation of Podcasts Network. I'm your host for today, Justin, and joining me are my incredible co-hosts. It's Brandon and Chrissie. So, Brandon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. I've been having trouble sleeping. I've been having a lot of vivid dreams and whatnot, and it almost feels like I've lived this whole other life.
Yeah, be careful when you're in that Jeffries tube. That's kind of dangerous if if that's happening to you. Chrissie, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm just over here watching old television shows on a 7-inch screen and really appreciating the 7-inch screen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one about Al Capon.
Yeah. Interesting figure. And the jingles. Who doesn't love the jingles?
So we are partly referencing what we're going to talk about today, but joining us again today for the second straight week is author James Swallows. So welcome back once again to Infinite Diversity, James.
Thanks again. Good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
James, you've just tied the record for three appearances on our podcast. You tied with that nasty Kevin Dillmore.
Oh, don't be mean. Kevin's lovely. I'm contractually obliged to say that.
Yeah,
we love Kevin. He's a great guest.
But that's great. Yeah, you're on here for the third time, and I'll talk about what we're going to talk about in a minute. But last time we didn't have any news, and listeners, yes, this is separated by a week, but we're recording it like basically right after the last one. Mm-hmm. So, Chrissie, Brandon, any earth-shattering news in the last few minutes?
Well, I don't know. You missed it last time. I wanted to talk about the fact that that Trek Corps posted that person's coming to season 2 of Lower Decks who was in Q Who and showed up in the SCE novels, and then they retracted it like 10 minutes later. So
and we're not going to retract anything. So since you mentioned it, I'm going to mention it. So apparently, Leisha Naff, who played Sonia Gomez in a couple episodes of TNG, seems is coming back to Lower Decks season 2, but they don't want to talk about it right now because it was accidentally spoiled in a podcast a few months ago. But I do have to say,
what podcast?
I think it's called Trek Untold.
Wow.
Yeah. But anyway, the only thing that I'll say about it before we move on is I love Gomez in the Starfleet Corps of Engineers novellas. I've read most of them by this point, and she's a main character and amazing in those. So if that happens in Lower Deck season 2, I'm going to really enjoy that. But
yeah, just give me a second while I finish my hot chocolate before we get too far on the computer here. So
she's got to be Captain of Da Vinci, right? If she comes back,
please.
Yes.
I certainly hope she would be Captain of Da Vinci for sure. Yeah. So anyway, we'll see what happens, and we'll talk about that when we talk about Lower Deck season 2, if it's still happening. But what we're going to talk about today is actually a Voyager episode, so season 6 episode Memorial. And James, we have you on to talk about this because you did the original pitch for the episode, and I want you to tell us and our listeners what that process was like pitching for what became Memorial.
Well, we're going back quite a way now, setting the Wayback Machine to the very, very early years of my career. Memorial was the second story pitch I sold to Star Trek Voyager. Previously, I'd sold the pitch for a story which ended up becoming the episode 1. After I'd done that, obviously, I was on cloud 9. I was just so stoked at the beginning of my career to be able to get something like that off the ground and have myself associated. That was really cool. But immediately after I'd done it, my first thought was, I have to do it again. Because I wanted to do this as an ongoing career. I didn't want people to think of me as a kind of one-hit wonder. You were just lucky, you sold that. You're not a proper writer. I didn't want to be thought of as a tourist. So, if anything, I put even more energy into trying to sell a second story idea. And even then, that took me 2 years. I think it was season 4 was 1, season 6 was Memorial. So, if you would consider me in that period, every kind of 3 to 6 months, either coming out to Los Angeles and pitching in person or doing it over the phone, writing 4 or 5 story ideas for every pitch, giving my heart and soul, and then getting those ideas shot down and then repeating that over and over and over again. if you guys know the show The X Factor, well, pitching is kind of that for writers, where you get up and you sing your heart out and you hope that people will like your song. And a lot of the time people are like, no, that's terrible. Get off, go away, go home.
Yikes.
And you do that over and over again. And, you know, it's pitching is a very, very harsh lesson. I absolutely, God, I hate doing it because it can be so soul destroying, as you can spend all this time working on story ideas that you think are fantastic. And they're like, no, try again. But I really like that idea. Well, we don't care. Try again. And you have to develop that kind of, you know, the thick skin that you can just get rid of ideas and you can be free and easy with coming up with new ones again and again and again. So it's a very intensive process. I had gone out to Los Angeles to pitch to Brian Fuller, who at that time was story editor on Voyager, obviously gone on to bigger and better things, becoming a producer and a creator himself. And I'm in his office. Brian had this massive collection of toys in his office everywhere, and he would sit there fiddling with action figures. While I remember he pulled the head off an action figure once while I was pitching to him because he popped and I was, oh, I'm sorry, which is very distracting. So I would pitch these story ideas, and what I would do is I would write out kind of like a 1-page document with all the beat by beat blows of my story idea. And then the day before I pitched, I would sit in my hotel room in Los Angeles and I would jot down kind of bullet points on an index card. So I could go into the meeting and have this handful of index cards and just pitch my stories. And I'm in the taxi on the way to Paramount. I have my 5 or 6 story ideas. And I had an idea that morning over breakfast, just a vague 2 or 3 line idea. And I just jotted it down on the back of the last index card and I stuck it in my pocket. I go into Brian's office. I pitch my 6 fantastic ideas and he hates every single one. Everyone is shot down one after the other. So imagine how I feel at that point. I've traveled halfway around the world to sunny Los Angeles to be shot down by one of my writing peers and heroes. And all I can do is get back in the taxi, go back to my hotel room and just feel miserable about it in the California sunshine. And just before I'm about to pack up my stuff and leave, Brian says to me, do you have anything else apart from those 6 ideas? Anything? And I said, well, there is this one thing that I jotted down on the back of this card, literally 2 lines. And he said, well, tell me about it. And I said, well, it's just this idea about our characters suffering from these traumatic flashbacks to a battle that they were never in. And I saw a light bulb kind of go on behind his eyes. And he's like, well, tell me more about this. And so there in the room, I began to just make this up, just pulling this stuff together, the kind of the concept of this thing. And I said, this is the idea about this idea of a war memorial, broadcasting these things that our characters get connected with. And he liked that enough that it got pushed upstairs. That went to Brown Braga and the other senior writers in the next story break meeting. And they bought the pitch. And I was just amazed that, I was an inch away from walking out of the door with nothing. But one small idea I had in the taxi cab on the way there ended up being the story that sold.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I have heard that story from other writers who have done pitches. Like, make sure you have, a bunch of ideas in case your favorite ones get shot down, you can have something else. So it kind of sounds like, well, and maybe just to take a step back, just to summarize the episode that aired, Memorial, which sounds like it's similar to the pitch. So basically, some of the members of the crew are on an away mission. I think it's Neelix and Tom and Chakotay and Kim, right? Yeah. So I think it's the 4 of them. They've been on this 2-week away mission, whatever. They're returning, and it turns out they're having these flashbacks like they've been in this battle. They really believe it. It feels really realistic because they've had contact with this, system or this planet that's broadcasting this thing, and it's kind of investigated throughout the episode and then spreads through the ship kind of as they get closer. But then they do find out there was a couple hundred years before this massacre of civilians that happened, and this culture wanted to make sure that no one would ever forget that, and that it kind of broadcasts these things so they can kind of really experience it. And we'll talk about some of the implications and what we think of that. But I'm just curious, James, like for the episode itself, it sounds like it's kind of similar to the pitch, but I'm curious if there were different things you had in mind or if it was pretty much fleshed out version of what you had in mind?
No, it was pretty much because it has a very strong kind of core idea. The concept for me, the science fiction concept at the heart of it was, I have always been kind of fascinated by war memorials. Where I grew up in North London, we had a very big, in the middle of a roundabout near a local shopping center, and it was this huge sort of construction. And I remember at a very early age seeing this thing and being kind of fascinated by what it represents, and the idea of these terrible events that have happened beyond the range of my knowledge or memory being memorialized in this way. And I was interested in how you would explore that in a science fiction context. Is what if, rather than just literally having an obelisk with a bunch of people's names on it, is that we could actually see through their eyes, understand the experiences that they had. And to me, that was a very compelling science fictional idea. And as we started exploring the ways we could play it out, came up with the concept is that the initial mystery of the story is that the memorial is malfunctioning. Is that what should happen is there should be kind of like a little precursor at the beginning that says what you are about to experience are these events. But what happens is the memorial was broken down because it's been there for so long, and now that part of the program is missing. So all the characters are experiencing these events and they don't know why. It's like, we never fought in this battle. We never did these things, or did we? So the initial question is, the characters are exploring is, did we do this and we forgot about it? Has something, because we've seen that before in Voyager, where characters have had their memories edited and they kind of questioning that. But eventually they come to realize that, that is the core of this story, is that these are events happen to other people, but now we're experiencing them. Why are we experiencing them? And eventually they come to figure out that it is this device. And the kind of final decision that is made is, the question is, well, do we turn it off because it's broken? And Janeway is the one who decides, because she's also experiences those events as well. So she sort of sees it from the front, and she is the one who makes the decision, is that rather than turn the device off, which would be going against the will of the people who built it in the first place, is to try and fix it and place a marker beacon in orbit around the planet and saying, if you come to this planet, you will have this experience. Because she sees, as the original creators of the memorial did, is that this is something, these terrible events must be commemorated. They must exist in living memory, because people lost their lives and this terrible thing happened, and it should always be remembered.
Yeah. And I have to say, before Brendan, Chrissie, I get some of your thoughts. I love this episode. I think that it has a really powerful, strong message, and it's really very much focused on that. So I'll just say that. But Brendan, any initial impressions or thoughts or questions you kind of had to start off?
I do have a question. I'm curious as to so after you make a pitch for an episode, how much involvement do you have in the writing of it, or is it just they just buy the pitch and then it's like, see you later, James?
Yeah, pretty much that. I mean,
okay.
Again, as I said, I was right at the very beginning of my career there. I didn't have an agent. I was sort of very much a newbie writer, and they came in and they offered me basically paper credit. They said, we're going to buy this idea from you, and we're going to give it to a writer who is part of the staff on the show, much more experienced than you, and we're going to let them write the story idea, which kind of, you can see from their point of view makes sense, because I was a newbie. I didn't have the experience to kind of create a whole script out of thin air. So they bought the idea out from me. And that was, I would have loved to have been more involved in it. In the end, I was kind of involved in the sort of the birthing of the idea. So I had the initial discussions with Brian Fuller. And then after the fact, it was Brannon Braga called me at home, which was an interesting experience in of itself. And Brandon and I had several conversations about how the story would work out. He was involved in breaking the narrative. So I kind of helped mold some of the plot line from the early sort of iterations, but past that point, it was taken on by a staff writer, and they carried it through to final completion.
Although I'll add, Brandon, I think, from what I've heard from other writers, it is possible, I think, if someone has enough writing experience, that they can be more involved and get the on-screen writing credit and all of that. So I think it depends.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I think very much because I wasn't living in the United States and I didn't have a lot of experience. There were a lot of strikes against me to even get as far as I did. So I was just happy to have got that far.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So yeah, I was when I was watching this the other day, getting ready for this. I'm like watching, and I was watching it on my iPad because I was watching it on my lunch break at work, and I'm like waiting, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna screen grab the credit when James' name comes out, and it didn't come up, and then I'm like, we had you on for Unification, and you had said, it's nice to be able to just talk about a Star Trek episode. And so I pitched this idea to you to come on and talk about Memorial because I thought it was your episode, and then your name didn't come up, and I'm like, did I pick the wrong episode? So I quickly go to Memory Alpha, and I'm like, what's going on here? And then I saw that it was the right one. So
yeah, and I had forgotten that your name isn't in the credits, James, and I was like, oh yes, it was the pitch, and sometimes it turns out differently, but yeah.
It's because I wasn't agented at that time, so I didn't have an agent to kind of argue for me. So maybe things might have gone a little differently if I had, but like I say, I was just I was just happy to be here at that point,
Sure. I mean, I think it's wonderful you even got to do those pitches and talk to people making Star Trek at that point. So Chrissie, any kind of initial thoughts or questions you have?
It's a wonderful episode. I think it is a good one to what's what I'm looking for. It's a good one to revisit right now in relation to what we saw going on last summer, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about our last question at the end. But the issue of why memorialize things and what they mean and what you're supposed to get out of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the interesting things in the episode before, if you're watching it the first time, what's going on is these really intense experiences that these crew members are having. And I think, as I was rewatching it, I was like, you're getting some really powerful performances out of these actors. I mean, I think they're all great actors, but this, I think, pushed them to a level that you rarely see them on Voyager, where you have, Neelix, who is kind of imagining he's in this battle and he needs to protect Naomi, and he's just kind of having a really difficult time. And then Kim has this claustrophobia inside of the Jeffries tube and has to get out, and Chakotay's having this nightmare. And then later on, when they've kind of figured out a bit what's happening and they're kind of arguing back and forth, it's really intense. Their feelings about it, no, this happened. There is no way this didn't happen. It was so real to me. So it just made me think about what that experience can do to someone. And I think it is talking about, PTSD and things like that. But I mean, I don't think you ever get a reference again to this episode, but I would think just even experiencing that. And at the end of the episode, the doctor says, well, that's permanent. That's going to be there as if it's a real memory for you. It would be incredibly traumatic. But I like how they play it in this episode. It's very, it's pushing them to the edge. And I kind of really like that gets to be explored through all those different characters.
I mean, we talked about the My Lai massacre in Vietnam as kind of the real world touchstone for these events, and how that had been memorialized through people who had been there and through the events that took place afterward, and how that became something that was emblematic of some of the worst excesses of the Vietnam War. And so we wanted to touch back on those ideas through this kind of science fiction context. And the other thing about the episode, I think that you touched on there as well, is the reason a story like this is appealing from a production standpoint is because it gives actors the opportunity to kind of push the envelope a little bit more. So they were allowed to step outside the bounds of the characters that they played on the show week by week and go to a really intense place that maybe a normal episode of the show wouldn't have allowed them.
Yeah. Did you have in mind when you were doing the pitch, which specific characters would be affected, or as part of the writing process, they decided, okay, these are the 4 initial ones?
I remember talking to Brannon about Janeway's always been my favorite Voyager character. I always feel like she's, after Kirk, she's my second favorite Star Trek captain. And I feel there's a lot of similarity between the two of them. And I remember saying, I want Janeway to do a "what gives you the right" speech. Because that always felt like that's a very Kirkian kind of thing. How dare you do this? Mm-hmm. And it felt like, to me, that was the emotional core that orbited around. And Kate Mulgrew does have that scene. It's in the trailer where she says, "We murdered these people," and she just it comes right out to the surface, and it's this really raw, sort of powerful moment. And that was definitely in my kind of initial impetus in the story, was to have that moment with her. And then the way it shakes out with the other characters, I mean, I think one of the smartest choices, as you said, wasn't something in my original pitch, but the idea of Neelix, who's this happy-go-lucky, friendly, chummy guy, and he goes through this incredible state change when he's re-experiencing this terrible traumatic event, and he becomes dangerous and scary. And that's a really great moment in the story, and I really love that.
Mm-hmm. But also, I think I hadn't thought about this when I was rewatching it, but it goes back. I mean, Neelix is happy-go-lucky for the most part, but you do see parts, especially the first season episode Jetrel, where he has been through some very traumatic, very awful things. So I can imagine this would kind of bring back up those things. Mortal Coil too, yeah. Mm-hmm. Like he's had some things that have been pretty traumatic, and I feel like a lot of times his happy-go-lucky kind of personality is to try to get through that and not to kind of be too immersed in the terrible things that he's seen. But yeah, it was interesting to have Neelix as a part of that, and Kim as well, because for the most part I think Kim is pretty like calm and let's reporting things, right? Like for the most part, he does have some great episodes, but he tends to be pretty calm, and he's just like really losing it in this episode, which I think is really interesting to see. Yeah,
poor Harry really does go through the ringer in this story.
Mm-hmm. I think it was a good mix of the crew to choose. I mean, like Neelix is my favorite character on Voyager, right? I mean, there's always one person who likes Neelix, and that's me, right? I mean,
but I like Neelix. He's not my favorite, but I do like him a lot.
Yeah, he's my absolute favorite character on Voyager. I love him. So, no.
But yeah, it is a good mix, and I would think there might be the potential to want to say involve Tuvok in it or something, because sometimes see what happens when Vulcans lose it, but he doesn't, which I think is a good choice. So anyway, they go through this this trauma, and they eventually kind of figure out what's going on. And there is one thing I think along the way that's really interesting that I wanted to call out, and it involves Neelix as he's kind of going through this, and Seven is there, and I just want to read the conversation because I think it gets to something pretty interesting. So Neelix says, Seven, when you were aboard, you were involved in some unpleasant activities, and Seven says, I helped to assimilate millions. I don't mean to be insensitive, but do you ever feel shame about what you did? And Seven says, frequently. So how do you manage to keep going knowing you've done such horrible things? And Seven says, I have no choice. And Neelix says, guilt is irrelevant? And Seven responds, on the contrary, my feelings of remorse help me remember what I did and prevent me from taking similar actions in the future. Guilt can be a difficult but useful emotion. Mm-hmm. And it's just reminding you of, I think one of the things that makes Seven's character really fascinating, she was forced to do these things that were awful and affected millions of people. And it's like, how do you keep going from that? Which I think is an essential question when you've been through something traumatic. Like, how do you keep going? And I think Seven's response is like, you just have to. You just have to figure it out. So I think it's an interesting conversation because I don't think there's too much that you see between Neelix and Seven like that, and I think she provides an interesting kind of perspective on that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, just wanted to throw it in there or get thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that scene a lot. It's such a great scene.
Yeah, because I think it also speaks to the responsibility as well, because we're kind of seeing it through the eyes of these people that went through this, but there's a certain amount of probably subjective parts or interpretation, right, on how to show this in this memorial. But, you're in this situation that's come about because of whatever is happening on their planet, war or some difficulty or something like that, and it's pushed them to the point where they kill all of these civilians, right? And then you think about the responsibility for these things, the individual people, whatever organization they're part of, or government, and like, where does the responsibility lie for these things? And I just wanted to open that up because I think it's an interesting kind of question when you're thinking about that. What do you guys think?
I think it's, something about the idea of like of a memorial to anything is when you see a war memorial, part of it is to remember the people who were lost, the soldiers who gave their lives bravely to defend their country. But it's also a warning against the folly of war. And I think that there's an aspect of that to this, is that the people that you see in that story on both sides suffer. The civilians suffer because they're attacked and killed, but there's also the suffering from the people who were forced to make the choice, forced into the situation where they had to shoot civilians, where they carry that guilt, like, as you say, referring back to the line that 7 and 9 does. And I feel like that's something that whole duality of it marbles its way through the whole story.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we don't know which side put it up, or if it was them both together after peace. I
mean, that's another interesting aspect as well, because it's not really clear how much time has passed after the event happened and then the memorial was put up. Is, like you say, who did that? Was it even the people who were involved in it? Was it some outside force or something else? It's like the question is it does that really matter? It's about the event. The event needs to be commemorated and memorialized rather than the sort of like the events surrounding it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you said one of the influences for this story was the My Lai massacre, which happened in Vietnam. But like as I was watching the episode, and each time I've watched it, I think about the Holocaust that happened in World War II, which is, I think, one of the most awful things that has ever happened. But there are groups of people who would deny that happened, or in some way want to forget about it. And I think that there have been a lot of things like memorials and museums and documentaries and things like that, right? To try to remember these things and make sure that we don't forget that. And what this episode poses, I think, is really interesting, like going beyond just like, words or images, but actually living it as if you are someone doing that. Now, I don't know if I would recommend, even if we had the technology, like actually doing that, because that could be pretty awful. But it did make me think that sometimes there's a distance, especially as more time passes, between the actual event as people experienced it and hearing about it, second and third hand, or if there's no one alive that was actually kind of went through that, which is a point that we'll get to at some point. But it just made me think, like, is there some importance to something more visceral or something that can make more of an impact on people? And it made me think, if we had that kind of technology, would it be helpful to do something like that for the kinds of people that would want to experience it? But at the same time, people who might be willing to discount or deny probably wouldn't want to even go through that experience, because they'd be like, that's not real. So anyway, I don't have any answers for this, but it just brought up like a lot of really like complex thoughts and feelings around those things, because I think it's very relevant that people can forget, especially as time passes, about some of these things, or not heed the lessons of them.
Very much so. I think that's an idea that's at the core of that story is, here we are in the 2020s. We're living in an era now where people who were directly experiencing the Second World War are dying off. And in our lifetimes, we will probably see the last of that generation pass away. Yeah. And with them passes away that experience. How do we keep the knowledge of that alive, of the tragedies and the heroism and everything that goes with that terrible experience? How do we keep that alive for the generations that follow, that people can be aware of it, that they can learn the lessons of history?
Yeah. I mean, and also, like, we're talking about the lessons of history, or if there's a certain period of time, like even in our own time, there are certain things that have happened and lots of people have like witnessed or experienced, and people want to think that it was a different way, right? Even what happened like earlier this month in the US. Like, so I think it could be there's all of these difficulties, I think, if we don't all have like a kind of basic like agreement on what is real and what is important, right? Or unless you want to, put in some alternate reality or interpretation. So I think that this is a very rich episode in like bringing up all of those thoughts and all of those feelings. Like, there's a lot of Voyager that I love, but I think this is one of my favorite episodes because it gets me thinking the most about like our current world and how we need to move through it. So So I just really appreciate that 2-line pitch you wrote in the back of a taxi.
Thank you. I mean, and I feel that, you know, I've often said this, and I think it's true. It's a touchstone about Star Trek is a mirror that holds itself up to the real world. And some of the best of Star Trek has been being able to take something that we maybe cannot palate in a literal sense, but we put it in a science fictional context, and we say it's about aliens or people with bumpy foreheads, and then we can present these ideas in a way that people don't feel immediately sort of against them. I don't want to be preached to. Well, here's a science fiction version of the same idea. We can kind of sneak that idea in through the back door and allow people to consider it kind of at a remove from the real world. And then hopefully they'll come to a conclusion they can assimilate that back into their real world experience.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's definitely a lot to talk about in this episode, and it definitely makes you reflect on what's going on right now. I love this episode as well because it makes me uncomfortable when I watch it. Like, I don't have a good feeling watching this episode because it does hit close to things that have happened on Earth. But I mean, this memorial though, like, is it the right thing for her to have done? To have fixed this thing? You know, like, we've got people on our planet right now who are denying that the Earth is round. Okay, like something as simple as the shape of our planet is disputed by people. Now, that's an extreme example. You guys have mentioned the Holocaust, and there's Holocaust deniers. Like, there's so much ample evidence of this stuff, yet people choose to deny that it happened. But something like this memorial that was created, we don't know who created it. It was meant to memorialize a specific event. But what is it that they're watching? Right? Mm-hmm. What was created? These can't just be memories. Because during the event, they wouldn't have been recording everybody's memories. So this is like a conglomeration of an event summing up something that happened. Right? And this was probably created by people sitting down and talking it over, right? Whether it was the people that were involved in the event that said, look, I felt this way, I did this is something that I saw happen. Mm-hmm. I mean, memory itself is never 100% accurate and can be influenced and changed by your moods and by reflection. You know, so it's really interesting to have this memorial that's forcing this vision upon people, right? So they come to this planet, but even still that this thing is broken, some other crew members were being affected by this thing before they were even close to the planet, right? Yeah. And so they decide to fix it in the end, and they put a warning buoy in there orbiting the planet to say this is what's going to happen down there. But if that thing is that powerful, like, it's still going to affect people before they even get to that planet, right?
Well, yeah, they actually said that it'll warn people before they enter the system, so that solar system. So I would think before it takes effect. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like, it. I think it is interesting, and you even put a poll up about this, right? Like, was Janeway right to fix this memorial? And it was. I thought it
would be more divided. Like, honestly, from my point of view of this episode, this is like Tuvix in that you've got 50-50 for people saying Janeway did the right thing or Janeway did not do the right thing. And so we only got 27 votes out of this, and 85% of the people said yes, Janeway did the right thing, and 15% of the people said no. I was one of the people. I don't think Janeway did the right thing by fixing this thing. Myself, I don't think that she did.
Tell us why.
So, so because of the fact that we don't know exactly how accurate this vision is that people are having, and this vision itself affects you in more of a way than any type of memorial should do. Like, for me, I don't need to go and experience the concentration camps of World War II to know that they're wrong. Like that's not going to change my
because you're
view.
already convinced of it. But what if someone who isn't convinced of it?
But as you said earlier, the people who are not,
might not.
They're not even going to want to go and partake in this thing, right? But I mean, but going through this event, this is going to change them. This is going to affect them. How is this different from what happened to O'Brien in Hard Time?
It's not.
Okay, you know. And I honestly, part of the reason why I also felt that this was going
except it doesn't feel like it's taking 20 years. I think that's a bit of a difference. But
there are differences. But part of the things that are going on right now, like, I was actually surprised to see this. Okay, so I'll ask you guys this.
Yeah.
Restoring this to its active potential. I mean, we've just gone through a whole period this year. We had a huge traumatic experience in 22. The Black Lives Matter movement. There was riots in and protests in the United States, and they were fighting for something. They were fighting for change. You guys can follow me on Twitter and Facebook. You know that I support what they were fighting for. But a net result of that is now any example of blackface in history of like TV shows and stuff has been removed from shows. Okay, so that we don't want to acknowledge this. We don't want to see this.
I think the response to that I think varies, because I think there is sometimes a want to keep that intact just to reflect what actually happened before, but there are other times when they might remove it. But on my podcast, Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast, we covered a film called Young and Innocent, and one of the main events in the film is the drummer. The killer is a drummer, and he wears blackface, and so the Hitchcock trope in it is that they've got this guy hiding in plain sight, and you don't recognize him because he's wearing blackface. We determine in the episode that it's okay to do this because it's a reflection of the time. It's a reflection of certain things that entertainers would be doing at that time, right? Yeah.
And while blackface is no longer something that's acceptable, completely eliminating it from history, it also completely takes something out that is a part of history that we can learn from and say, hey, this is not appropriate. This is how culture and entertainment is represented. So now you're forcing, but just saying, so now you're forcing to have this memorial do this. You're forcing people to experience something that they don't want to have to experience.
I disagree. You're not, when they fix it and they put the warning buoy, you're not forcing people. They will get a warning and they can either go away and not experience it, or they can. So for me, that's what makes it the right decision, that you do get a warning. The problem is that it was broken and that you don't get this warning to know what's going on. But if they fix it and they say, hey, this is what's going to happen if you enter this system, like click yes to agree, I think is the equivalent, right? Like, oh yeah, I sign off on like all the terms and conditions on this or whatever. But like if you go forward and do that, then I think there's nothing wrong with that. And if this is the way in which this culture wanted to remember and spread the message and the lesson of what happened to others who are willing to partake in it, I think that that's fine. And that's why I voted yes on the poll, because you do have to give consent from now on in order to do that, instead of being forced like they were. Now, hopefully it doesn't break in a few hundred years and have the same problem. But Chrissy, sorry, you had something.
I just, I don't remember seeing, and it might just because I didn't run into it, but I don't remember seeing anything about entertainment material being censored. I know like HBO Max took Gone with the Wind off for a while for no reason, but you can still find the stuff that has, you can still find that Hitchcock movie. You can still, I mean, there was an episode of Mad Men where one of the main characters was in blackface for part of it, and that was within the last decade. It was presenting in the 60s, of course, but
Right, and that they actually addressed that. So, there was a lot that removed them. Like, a Golden Girls episode had it, like, a bunch of shows had it, and they're like, okay, we've taken this episode away from streaming services now. We've taken it out. Mad Men determined that they're going to keep theirs because they determined that within the context of the episode, it was relevant as well, because Don Draper and his wife, removed themselves from the situation because it was inappropriate, right? So it was based on the context of how it was shown. But this is something, like, even going back to Fantasia, right? There's, there's you can no longer get the original version of Fantasia, because in the scene with the little, what are the half horse people? There's Centaurs. Ones that are like centaurs. There's the black stereotype characters that are in there. And so when you watch it, they have zoomed in on the frame to crop those things out of it, to not show it. And I'm I'm a white person. So at the end of the day, this stuff doesn't affect me like it affects other people. Right? There's other people that affects differently than it affects me. Right?
Yeah, but to your point, I do think it is important that those things be preserved and people are able to see them for what they are, which is a product of their time. And whenever I come across something that I'm watching, because I do like to watch old movies and stuff, but if I come across something that I think you frequently see a lot of sexist stuff that happens in these older, movies and TV shows or whatever. It's like, that's very unfortunate. That's a product of its time, but it's important to know that that was happening then and not to pretend that that wasn't a problem or that didn't happen. So I agree with you on that, but I don't think people from now on would be forced to view this memorial.
I don't agree in censoring anything. Really. Well, no, I'm not going to say that. You can censor the person that's calling for insurrection at the Capitol on the 6th of January. But other than that, other than that type of thing, it's people need to know what happened. The thing that strikes me the most about this, and I'll get to, because I did retweet the poll and I had some comments, but I'll get to that in a minute. The thing that strikes me about this is that there's no context. Okay. We know that these people are being removed. We don't know why. We know that these soldiers are conceivably in the midst of some kind of war because they've been awake for days. Okay.
But I thought that had to do with it being broken. It's become fragmented, and you're not really seeing the whole thing in the whole context.
Well, I mean, for me, the whole context would start with why is there fighting? What happened between these two groups?
Right, but I think there are parts that we're not seeing through the eyes of the Voyager characters because it's malfunctioning and you're missing pieces.
I don't disagree, but it's context is important, as you guys have heard me say many times. It occurred to me just as we were talking here that a different group of people running into this, let's say some very
Kazon?
Yeah, well, I was going to say some very war happy Klingons, but you could say Kazon too. How did they experience that? They come in and they go, they have these experiences and they say, okay, these people were in a war. They came out victorious. End of story. And so that is important too. And that goes along with the context to me. And so there is this issue of does a monument in general, this one or any other one you want to talk about, does it venerate or does it warn? I think this one's a warning.
I think this is a warning. I mean, it depends on how it is, right? Because you will see some memorials. I mean, I guess it depends on how you define it. But let's say you will see something that commemorates something. Like, for example, even, here in El Paso, Texas, where I live, right at the airport, there is this gigantic statue of one of the conquistadors, and they're like on their horse in like a heroic pose, and like, so I think that's venerating that. But then you could have something that would be more like recognizing the victims or who else was involved, or the diversity of people that were involved in this thing, not just the conquerors or something like that. So I think it depends. But James, we've taken over the conversation a little bit. I want to get some of your thoughts on some of these things we've been talking about.
I was going to say that obviously some of the intentions that I had for the story don't pay out in the episode, partially because there's just not the space to explore them. Mm-hmm. But certainly I can say that, in my initial concept for what the memorial device was, is that what you see is what really happened. And, Brandon, you were saying earlier on that you weren't sure, like, is this like a documentary where a bunch of people have got together and said, okay, well, we've got a bunch of notes here about what people said happened. We're going to create a performance, a simulation based on available facts. My intention would be that, no, this is what actually happened. And you weren't seeing like a holographic representation. You were really experiencing the memories of people who were there. So it would be not varnished in any way, shape or form. It would not be, you couldn't say, oh, this is slanted, because of course the thing is once you start to tell a story, you bring your own prejudice to that story and you will slant it in one way or another, even if you don't intend to.
Right.
So all you can do is present as close to the truth as you possibly can. So the idea would be is that everyone who experiences those memories, they are literally experiencing memories that have been copied from people who were there. Mm-hmm. And the other idea was that the memorial would have many of these stored, and it would pick the memory that was closest to your personal experience. So although again, these are kind of ideas that we had that never really kind of boil up in the stories. Yeah. So Janeway is in a commanding position because she's a commander. So when you see her in the story, she's in a similar position to the one she has in the real world. Similarly, Harry is kind of alone in this situation, so he is placed in a situation of memory where he is alone. And you see similarities in the experiences that Neelix had to the memory he experiences. So, and the reason for that is so it feels personal to you. So that when you encounter the memorial, it would speak to you in a way that you personally would connect with, rather than just seeing something like on a kind of broad screen at a remove where it's, that's terrible, but I don't directly connect with it. And the device would say, okay, I'm going to give you a memory that will feel connected to you, so you understand the trauma and the power of what happened. And part of it to me was the key problem with it is that the device is malfunctioning. Is what it should be like is, I don't know if any of you ever visited the Holocaust Museum, is when you go in is, there's an advisory, there's a warning right there at the front saying, you will see, once you walk in here, you will see things that are traumatic and terrible, and you may have a hard time dealing with them. So, think carefully if you want to walk through these doors and you want to see these things. And that's what's missing from the memorial in this story, is that kind of terms and conditions disclaimer. Is like, if you go past this point, you will experience these real events. And that's the mystery our characters encounter at the beginning, is why is this happening? Because there is no context. Chrissie, as you said, they have no context for what is happening to them. But if everything was working correctly, you would have that context. You would understand culturally and historically for these people where that belonged in their history and why you were being presented with it.
I think one of the interesting things about the episode as well is that they get to the planet and those people don't seem to be around. And I don't know if we're supposed to take from that they just kind of killed themselves off in wars or somewhere else. I don't know. But
I want to go. I'll tell you what my headcanon has always been for this episode. So I don't assume that this is their home planet. I've always assumed that this is just the site of a pivotal battle in this war.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's why the memorial is here, right? You have that's where the pivotal battle was. So that's just how I've always interpreted the story myself.
Yeah,
I could see that. Is the idea? I could imagine. You could imagine people from that culture visiting that planet on a kind of cultural pilgrimage, to visit that place, to have that experience, and then going away again.
Well, and it is
a
group of people that we are seeing being removed. So they could be the last of a group of colonists. We don't know.
Yeah. I don't know, but it seems like nobody has been there for quite some time.
That is true.
But, So, I mean, I think it's been a really good and interesting discussion about a really fascinating episode. Chrissie or Brandon, do you guys have other kind of questions or discussion points you wanted to talk about?
I have a little bit that we could call a history corner, but if Brandon wants to...
Oh,
go right ahead.
Chrissie's history corner.
This whole thing has been kind of a history corner, but...
True.
All right, so...
Chrissie's history episode.
So, right, so I mentioned earlier that this is important to revisit in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests, in the wake of the discussion about whether or not Confederate monuments should be removed. Okay. Now, the one piece of information, and here I will say context, okay, with most of those Confederate monuments, is that they were not put up during the war, or even in the immediate aftermath of the war.
Or even shortly after.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the people who are arguing that they shouldn't be removed are doing so from a place of not necessarily well, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they don't know that that's the case. Maybe I'm being too nice in some cases, but we'll go with that. But that takes us to the point of monuments indicate what's important to a society. Okay. And so if you see a monument to a war hero, you assume that the people who put up that monument won the war, generally speaking. There are a lot of examples where that's not the case with memorials to more ancient cultures. James, there's that beautiful Boudica monument that's in London. She did not win that war. Okay. And there's others like that too. But generally speaking, if you're talking about, especially in the time that it's put up, this is about what's important in the society. And so most of those monuments were put up during a period that's called the nadir, the low point of race relations in this country. And I'll suggest James Lowen's Lies My Teacher Told Me and his Lies Across America, that he goes through and talks about all the monuments and their context and all of that. And also his Twitter feed, because he was talking about this all summer. You can go back and read it. The point of those monuments was to venerate the culture that the Confederacy was about. And the central part of that culture was slavery. So you have a situation where there's a monument in the middle of a city in, say, South Carolina, where you have a majority African-American population, okay? And the white people who are walking past that monument are like, oh, okay, there's a white person who fought in a war. And maybe they know more. Maybe they have a family that fought in that war. But they have reasons to feel good about it, okay? I'm just saying on a broad, I'm not saying that all white people don't know what was going on or anything like that, but just on a broad spectrum. And that was the idea when these were put up in the 20s and 30s. But at the same time, the person of African descent, the descendants of the enslaved, walk past that and they're put in their place by it. And it's the same thing with that conquistador that you mentioned, Justin.
Yeah.
They're being put in their place by it. Figuratively speaking.
I mean, but there's also a really complicated history as well. Like even in the South, between different races mixing, and people might have ancestors that were slave owners and slaves, and we have people here in El Paso whose ancestors were both conquistadors and those that were being conquered by the conquistadors. But the context is interesting, because I think for those Confederate monuments as well, when they were put up, it was a way to try to kind of reinforce some of the Jim Crow segregation and white supremacy. This is what white supremacy, right? So I think there is an argument to be made to take something like that down, because it really does kind of affect how people think, and the context of it being put up was really to oppress other people. Yeah. And
that's why I mean, when I'm saying that people are being put either feeling good about it or being put into a lower class place, a second class, however you want to put it, place. But yeah, so I did think that it was the correct thing to leave the monument there fixed, okay, giving the context with the understanding that people are walking into it, knowing what they're getting into. And what I tweeted about it, for those that haven't seen it, I tweeted that the reality of history has to be told, both positive and negative, both uplifting and saddening, and it has an effect. Because I don't think we would see the same kind of fetishization of the Confederacy and Nazism if people could have these personal memories of experiencing the other side of that, of experiencing being enslaved, of experiencing being put into a concentration camp and executed or worked to death. Yeah. So there's a value there. Okay?
Yeah. I mean, there's something else which I think is an interesting decision for this monument in this episode, which is they're seeing it through the eyes of these soldiers, right? And I think actually the most effective thing that you could possibly do is to be able to see it through the eyes of the victims, because I think just generally one of the things that happens, whether someone is espousing, white supremacy or, venerating the Confederacy or whatever, is that they're seeing it through a certain point of view and they don't see how it affects someone with a different point of view. So I think seeing it through the eyes of someone else who is not like you, which maybe is different than the concept you were talking about, James, where it's somebody like you can relate to. I think the problem sometimes is feeling that people that are affected are somehow less than you or not even human or like that you can't understand their perspective. So I think the most important and most effective thing is being able to understand that perspective through that person that is most deeply affected by it. So,
and that's why I asked who put it up.
Because the issue there is that the point of the memorial is that those people were all killed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there is no. I think part of the reasoning behind why the memorial is there is to speak for the dead. The inferences here is that the memorial was constructed. I mean, it could have been anybody who did it, but to me, the inference is that the people who were behind that atrocity are the ones who put the memorial up. And
right.
Their reasoning is, we did this terrible thing, and it was wrong, and we're atoning for that. And this is, not only are we atoning by saying we will never do that again, but we were also going to leave this memorial here as a concrete kind of reminder that the generations that follow must remember never to do something like this again, to strive to be better people. But because there's none of the colonists, we see all the colonists being killed. So there is no other way for them to kind of speak for the dead other than sort of doing it from their point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, not only are they killed, but they're vaporized to cover up the evidence, so you can't recover memories or anything. So yeah, I mean, this has been a really great discussion. I'll definitely be interested, listeners, to see what you think or what your perspective is on this. But Chrissie or Brandon, any final thoughts or other things we haven't covered?
I love this episode. I mean, like, it's
me too.
It's so good, and even in this time, like, there's so many episodes of Star Trek that are like, you watch them when they air, and you're like, that's good, and then you watch them like 10 years later, and you're like, why is this more relevant? What's wrong with our planet? That this is more relevant. Yeah, and then that, and then in Enterprise with Detained, like it's just really nuts, like how great Star Trek is.
I completely agree. I love this episode too. I think it's one of the top episodes of Voyager. And again, we thank you, James, for dashing off that pitch all those years ago and pitching it to Brian Fuller. So yeah, this has been a great discussion. So thanks again for being with us 2 episodes in a row. For this particular one, again, tell our listeners where they can find you online.
Well, I have to say as well before I sign off.
Go ahead.
I have to thank Brannon Braga and Robin Berger. Brannon for writing the story, developing the story out of the premise I wrote, and Robin Berger who wrote the final version of the teleplay, because this story just wouldn't have the energy or the impact that it does have. It wouldn't have the juice that it's given us to talk about this subject without their work as well. So hats off to them for making my story look great, making me look good, and doing such fantastic work with it. But in terms of where you can find me, you can catch me up on Twitter at JMSwallow. I'm there pretty much every day tweeting stuff about Star Trek and other things. Or you can come to my website, which is at jswallow.com. Okay, awesome. Yeah, and tell our listeners also current and upcoming work in case they didn't hear it the last episode. Well, I've just recently had a Star Trek Picard novel come out called The Dark Veil. That's available in hardback audiobook and ebook editions right now. My next project is going to be a Mark Dane novel, which is part of my original thriller series. The 3rd book in that series, Ghost, is out in hardback in the United States. And the 5th book in that series, Rogue, is also out in hardback here in the UK. I have another Star Trek project in the offing, which I can't talk about right now, but if you keep your eyes on my website, you should hopefully see something about that in the coming months. Okay, awesome. Yeah, we're definitely looking forward to that. And whenever that comes out, we'll probably like to have you on to talk about it. Definitely. So awesome. Yeah, thanks again, James. We really appreciate you coming on to talk about this. All right. So Brandon, I usually put in a joke here, but I won't. I'll just say, where can people find you when you're not talking about deep philosophical Star Trek topics? You can find me on Twitter at Brandon Matella. You can find me here on the network with a show called Franchise Fatigue, which is all about movies, remakes, and sequels over on the Fandom Podcast Network, as well as in our own feed. We have a show called Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast covering Hitch's films in chronological order. And we also have a show on the Nerd Party Network with my friends Tristan and John, and we cover movie directors in chronological order like I do with Hitchcock, but right now we're covering Christopher Nolan. All right, excellent. So Chrissie, where can people find you when you're not thinking about new history corners and history episodes for 2021? Yes. Let's see. Of course, you can talk to me about this or any of our episodes in the Federation Council Chambers on Facebook. I'm really interested to know what people think about this one. So
Yes, please leave us comments on this one. We're very interested.
Did Janeway do the right thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also on Twitter at the Goddess Livia. That's TheGoddessLivia, where I tweet about Star Trek history and leftist politics. And you can also follow my work in history by liking the History with the Szilagys page on Facebook, and that's spelled SZILAGYIS. And that links to our page, historywiththeszilagys.org. And there you will see our most recent project, Historical Musings, which I have not been on top of, but I'm working on it. Semester started again, you know how that can be. But I do have to say I will be doing a special episode, a special write-up of Ancient Aliens is BS for the upcoming Ancient Aliens episode with William Shatner. I have no idea what they're going to be talking about, but I'm sure it'll be good.
All right. Well, and much simpler for me, you can find me on Twitter at TrekFan4747, where I tweet about nothing but Star Trek, and in the Federation Council Chambers on Facebook. So thank you very much for tuning in once again to Infinite Diversity. Thank you to our executive producers, Ken Tripp, Tony Robinson, and Zach Moore. Thank you to Zach Tripp for the wonderful theme music and Tony Robinson for the awesome show art. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and please subscribe. If you want to reach out, you can find the network on Twitter at UFP Earth, or our show specifically at IDIC Podcast. And you can also talk about any and all of the UFP podcasts in our Facebook group called the Federation Council Chambers, or email us at infinitediversity@ufp.earth. So on the next episode, there is some stuff we'll be talking about, and we may have a special guest. I can't say any more until we confirm it for sure, but I'm sure we'll see you in a few weeks. And until then, peace and long life.
This has been a production of MTMR Media Works.